So let's step back and take a big picture view here. Integration by parts is the opposite of which derivative rule, and U substitution is the opposite of which derivative rule. Try and think of it before I write it. IBP is the opposite of the product rule, and U substitution was the opposite of what? The chain rule, which might be making you wonder, is there an opposite of the quotient rule? There is. There's a link to it at the end of the homework, but nobody ever uses it. Don't worry about it. Let's talk about how we choose U and dv. In general, we want U to get simpler. It's not exactly clear what simpler means, but usually, like I'd say x is simpler than x squared, or a constant is simpler than a linear function. So we want U to get simpler when taking the derivative. We're not too picky about dv usually, just we have to be able to take an antiderivative. Don't choose a dv where there is no antiderivative formula or where you'd have to do something really complicated to take the antiderivative. Another thing to think about, when we were doing U substitution, doing U equals x was just changing the name of the variable and didn't actually make the integral any easier at all, so we never did that. In integration by parts though, if I use U equals x, what's du going to be? Dx, which sounded silly in U substitution, but that actually makes it simpler, right? A constant like 1 times dx is simpler than x, and so it's actually a reasonable choice to try in a lot of cases. You might be thinking I'm going to need a lot of creativity to come up with what's the best U, what's the best dv, and on occasion you do, but there's this nice guideline that someone made up, Herbert Kasubi, I think. So this is guidance. It's not an absolute rule. It's something to try first. And the idea is pick whichever of the following things in this list comes first, make that U. If there's any logarithms, inverse trig, algebraic, which mostly means polynomial. Every now and then it means something else, but don't worry about that. Trig functions and exponential. So you kind of go down the list. Do I have this in my integrand? Do I have this in my integrand? And as soon as you hit something that you do have, make that U, and then dv is whatever's left over after you pick the U. You might be wondering, is there a fun way to remember this order? And there is. It's the acronym LIATE, which is a made-up word, so no one can tell me that I'm pronouncing it wrong when I say LIATE. You can pronounce it however you want. So that's one way of deciding how to pick U and dv. Another way, independent of LIATE, is choose dv to be the most complicated part of the integral that you can take the antiderivative of. And then, since taking antiderivatives is usually more difficult than taking derivatives, so that's something to try if you tried LIATE and it just didn't work for you.